Welcome to F Exclusive. I'm Atul Singh. With me is Glenn Carl. Our three issues for November are: Emperor Xi now turns lover boy in San Francisco. Israel-Hamas war divides societies in the West. And the far right soars in the Netherlands and Argentina. So, topic one, issue one for November. Emperor Xi now turns lover boy in San Francisco. Not too long ago, wolf warrior diplomacy was in the ascendant. Since Emperor Xi Jinping took charge, China has been engaging in aggression in the East China Sea, in the South China Sea, the Himalayas, and elsewhere. Suddenly, Xi has gone from Rambo to Romeo. Glenn, what is going on?
Well, I guess he's Romeo. I'm sure there's a Chinese equivalent to Romeo, but I don't know Chinese literature well enough. Uh, well, just as um, people have, I think, tended to see the Chinese as 10 feet tall because of their growth rates and the greatest economic growth in history, um, so China's critics have tended to see it as the paper tiger, to coin a phrase, that would collapse because of the contradictions of communism. Both of those perceptions are grotesquely over simplified. And I think what is happening actually is that for at least 18 months, both Xi and President Biden have been, both governments, the government in China really means Xi, of course, have been trying to lower the temperature and tensions between China and the United States. And each party has failed until now because of really domestic reactions to their initiatives. Xi was I was going to say undercut, but that's a poor choice of terms since it was a balloon that overflew and undid his initiative to reach out to the United States. And I'm referring, of course, to the spy balloon capers, about which she only learned, as I knew was the case, after the fact. The Chinese intelligence operation had been just going along machinally, following a strategic directive to be aggressive and to collect intelligence, which is fine, but without any particular comprehensive thought to the whole issue. And then uh, when they were discovered or became public anyway, the U.S. had to respond, which forced the Chinese to become defensive. And so that made it impossible for Xi to reach out, and it made it impossible for President Biden to reach out. There have been a number of incidents like that have kept both parties from trying to lower the temperature. Why do they want to lower the temperature? Well, the Chinese are actually feeling the heat of their own policy errors, in particular economic. We've spoken many times, Atul and I, and of course many others, observers, about the growing strains on all sectors of the Chinese economy and the impossibility that China could continue growing at 8% per year. No economy that is at the cutting edge of technological development and industrial processes can maintain that. And then there are all of the domestic other problems, in particular the demographic one, uh, that make
Just
it
to
hard for China to continue as aggressively as it has. So that's one motivation. Sorry, Atul. Yeah.
Not at all. Just to add to your point, Glenn, as we were discussing before we came live, there has been a meltdown of the real estate sector in which most of the wealth, as you've repeatedly pointed out, is tied. Uh, Households tend to buy property. There isn't a developed financial sector. They don't hold stocks to the same degree. They don't hold bonds. So the meltdown of the real estate sector, the crackdown on businesses under Xi, the disastrous zero COVID policy, the pain inflicted by trade wars and this whole talk about nearshoring, reshoring, friendshoring.
Growing alarm that
Yeah,
China is having to
yeah,
feel because of, frankly, almost the entire world's response to
yeah.
Chinese economic, political, and military aggressiveness.
Yeah, and their exports have gone down, their employment has gone down, young people are praying for jobs, temple visits have gone up. So all of this is causing Xi for a rethink or a recalibration.
So it's in his interest. I mean, no leader, no country will do anything that they don't imagine is in their own interest. And it is important for every economy to have as robust growth as possible. And the Chinese are feeling the pinch. One of the ironies in the Chinese system is that it's an ostensibly communist society, and yet it has among the weakest social safety nets of any developed economy, uh, meaning that, as Atul just touched upon, 80% of Chinese private citizens' savings is in the real estate sector. They do not have social security as Americans do, remotely as robust. So when they must take care, they, meaning Chinese households, must really take care of themselves and their futures much more directly than is the case in Western social democratic societies. And since the economy has restricted forever how one may invest money, the only place that it could go really has been to real estate. So when real estate collapses because it has been run corruptly through government controlled, military controlled monopolies and oligarchies, and loses money and then collapses, so does 80% of the investments and the savings for 1.3 billion Chinese, which is potentially catastrophic. So it is certainly in Xi's interest to try to address this. Thus, he's not seen the light particularly and will change his policies, but he has felt the squeeze. And it is in his interest to lower the temperatures with the United States. That's just the Chinese side.
Yeah, so very quickly, let's go through what actually happened in this summit on November 15th. So there were no major surprises, but Beijing launched a major charm offensive. And, well, both sides said the talks were candid and wide ranging, which are cliches. However, the important line for us that stood out in Xi's speech was this: the number one question for us is, are we adversaries or partners? China, she said, is ready to be a partner and friend of the US. Now, importantly, and this is extremely important, if you go to the White House website, this sentiment is not echoed by Biden because President Joe Biden emphasized that the US and China are in competition. He went on to say that the US would continue to invest in the sources of American strength at home and align with allies and partners around the world. Biden also said that the US would always stand up for its interests, its values, and its allies and partners. As per Biden, the world expects the US and China to manage competition responsibly to prevent it from veering into conflict, confrontation, or a new Cold War. So if you notice the rhetoric from both sides, the rhetoric from Xi is a lot softer than the rhetoric from Biden. And importantly, and this is very important for our friends in business, people who have bought shares in big companies, Xi courted the business community and he targeted, the broader atmosphere. He tried to create space for businesses to remain committed to China. Most likely, life will get easier for multinational corporations in 2024. And very importantly, for those interested in business and economics and finance, She said China would continue to improve the mechanisms for protecting the rights and interests of foreign investors, further shorten the negative list on foreign investment, fully ensure national treatment of foreign investors, and continue to strengthen intellectual property rights protection. Now, this is a new tune. This is not what the Chinese were singing even a few months ago.
Well, I agree mostly, I think. China, I think it's important for all of us to realize that the true audiences, the targets of both Biden's and Xi's statements and the United States's and China's decisions or actions at the San Francisco summit really was not China or the United States. It was every other country on earth. China wants to be seen as more trustworthy, less alarming, and therefore more acceptable to do business with. And the United States wants to, Biden wants to reassure or assure the same countries that the United States is not withdrawing. The United States is trustworthy, not just militarily. There's, I think, been an overfocus on the strategic military steps the U.S. is taking to, quote, counter, unquote, China, because I guess there's more meat to that than there has been to trade successes. There's been a big failure, actually, in the U.S.-Asian trade policy just recently, which hasn't received a lot of notice. We'll get to it in a moment. But to show that you needn't kowtow to China or forget that the United States wants to be premier inter pares and certainly engaged. Those are the audiences, and fundamentally China's policies, and they'll be clear about it, of course, are not really changed. And the model, although the rhetoric of Xi is we are multilateral and we accept the WTO, the model invariably and for thousands of years has remained that they are happy to do bilateral agreements so long as the partner of China realizes that the Middle Kingdom is the center of the earth. They'll do bilateral deals based on Chinese norms. The Chinese norms, they would be happy to set as international ones through the WTO. But it's a different model than the normative system that would regulate the law of the sea, for example, in the South China Sea. And the U.S., in contradistinction, is saying, well, we aren't really leaving. Now, the error, the failure that has happened is that there's no support really for free trade agreements domestically in the United States. And so Biden can't do that sort of thing. He cannot replace the Trans-Pacific partnership that Trump destroyed, which would have been the signature central strategic response to China's rise. And the IPEF, which is the International, I forget what the acronym is for. In any event,
Indo-Pacific Economic Framework.
Thank you. Thank you. That was the best that Biden could manage for dealing with supply chain rules and intellectual property among Asian partners. Now is coming a cropper even before implementation because of U.S. domestic opposition by Democrats, no less.
So Glenn, if I may
that's
interject,
the backstory.
If I may interject, part of the problem is that for all the U.S. rhetoric of norms-based order, the US has not signed UNCLOS. The US has walked out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership after a decade or so of negotiation. So the US has undermined its own norms. Ipso facto, China's claim that, look, we are more trustworthy and we are actually friendly and harmonious, as Peter Isaacson would say. He says China believes in harmony, and of course the U.S. culture prizes competition. I don't know. As an Indian facing over 3,000 kilometers of Himalayan borders, I entirely agree with Peter. But hey ho, there we go. The point, however, is that the Chinese do make a strong case against the fact that the US norms are nothing but cover for realpolitik aims.
Well, and just as in the 19th century, the saying was that trade follows the flag. In this instance, um, agreements followed the trade,
Yeah.
and since
As the
China
Solomon
is
Islands proved in the Pacific.
my preferred example, actually, I've become to feel strong endearment towards the Solomon Islands. Um, but since China is the number one trade partner with most countries in the world, every country in the world would be a fool not to, if they had to make a choice, look to Beijing rather than to a country that can't manage to fulfill its own trade agreement negotiations. So, in any event, uh, for the short medium term, Xi, however, is feeling the pressure of his domestic policy errors and the struggles, and so has had to attempt to make nice with the United States, which on the other side has been having success in winning support for a more coordinated, robust reaction to, frankly, Chinese economic and other imperial behavior.
Very quickly, in the summit, some of the concerns of the US were addressed. One of them was fentanyl. It's ironic given the fact that the Opium Wars opened up China to free trade, and free trade at that time by the Anglo Saxons meant that they grew opium in India, so they gave starvation to the brown people, and they exported this opium to China, and they gave addiction to the yellow people. But hey ho, there we go. China seems to be paying back that debt in fentanyl, and of course the U.S. Made a hue and cry about it, and China said, "Well, we'll do something about it." More importantly, perhaps, military to military ties were established. Now, these were suspended when Pelosi visited Taiwan in August 2022. Why is this important? Because this may reduce the chances of unwanted escalation. However, critics are saying, hang on a minute, China has not changed its posture in the waters and airspace of Chinese coasts. It is continuing to be aggressive in the South China Sea, bullying the Vietnamese, bullying the Philippines, yada yada. So why restore cooperation? On AI, of course, where the US was blocking China from access to chips and other cutting-edge technology, their discussions have begun again so that the US does not follow what Xi says a zero-sum game that blocks a legitimate path to development for the Chinese people. On climate, there is talk again. China has been building coal plants. It has pledged not to build them. And let's see what really happens at the COP28 later this month. And finally, they also promised to have people-to-people exchange, which arguably will cause a thaw in US-China relations, which will avert the Thucydides trap in which a ruling power inevitably confronts a rising power, and there is danger of war. And perhaps to a lot of people who like cute pandas, the most important bit of news might be that the Chinese are willing to send pandas to American zoos again. So that is it in a nutshell about the substance of the talks. Over to you, Glenn.
Yeah, the last, I guess, remark I'll make for the moment on this is the general view presented by the various media, of course, that covered the summit, has been ho hum. Nothing much came out of this, and I think that is actually wrong. No, the millennium hasn't arrived. The millennium arrived 23 years ago, um, but these agreements that are restorations of the circumstances prior to the deterioration in the last several years of in relations between China and the U.S. are substantial, even if they don't have concrete um, benefits that one can point to in a dollar term or in a amount of tons of goods shipped immediately. Uh, it's also a return and a validation, frankly, of two generations of American foreign policy towards China, which have come under severe attack by the American right, which is to cooperate where cooperation is possible, and she would completely agree, and to compete, hoping to avoid a clash where vital interests are in play. Thus, the United States is now starting joint naval patrols with the Philippines, and at the same time is seeking to return to cooperating as closely as possible with China on the threat of AI. I wouldn't say it's an undoing of the IP restrictions that the U.S. has placed, but on what is possibly an existential issue on how to regulate AI dissemination and development, as well as carbon emissions. There, both countries have mutual interest to work together, and so Hillary Clinton was bashed for advocating cooperation and competition, which has been the American position for decades, and that is what is at present China's policy too.
Interestingly, one quick comment by one of our attendees, and this person is saying, well, isn't the US economy also facing the heat, rising debt up to $31 trillion, rising inflation, increasing trend of de-dollarization across the global south and the developing world? My answer to that, and we'll move on from this topic immediately after this, is that, well, yes, debt is an issue. There is political football over the debt ceiling. That's an immediate issue. Inflation is an issue, although it's starting to come down. De-dollarization, Glenn and I have written an article on the dollar as the world's reserve currency. I think that's more hype than substance. There is no alternative to the dollar as yet. Tomorrow there may be, but not yet. And the developing world and the global south are too fractious right now to come up with any other form of trade arrangement. That may change tomorrow if the US defaults on its debt, but the US is not under threat on that front, but debt and inflation certainly. And perhaps from a very simple electability point of view, because 2024 is election season, if a full trade war were to break out and stuff on Amazon got expensive, such as electric kettles, ironing boards, the stuff you need for daily life, then politicians could be in hot water. So I think, yes, it is in the US interest not to let this relationship spiral out of control. A trade war and war are in no country's interests. That is why perhaps Xi Jinping has become lover boy, and Joe Biden is happy to make out with him for now.
I have to give at least 30 seconds of inflation devalued 2 cents on this. The 3 points mentioned are significant because they are politically in play, or one, and argued about, and two are in the perception of many real issues, and so perception becomes reality in certain ways. But when one looks at the merits of each of the cases, they really descend almost to the level of irrelevant nonsense and untruths. The debt crisis has been a brickbat from the right for decades. It has always been exaggerated and misunderstood, frankly, in the United States context, because the U.S. has certain advantages, being the largest economy with the reference currency in the world and so on, that other countries do not. But even at the size of the percentage of debt to GNP and so on, which appears large, it is not, has never, and continues not to pose a particular problem for the United States, so long as the United States working economy is relatively productive, and that the size of the debt slowly diminishes every year over time because of inflation. So debt is not, frankly, more than a political issue. Substantively, it's not an existential threat to the U.S. economy. Inflation, the perception, frankly, and many Americans, most Americans apparently share this view that it's a problem, is again wrong. Inflation is down to, I think, pre-pandemic levels. It's 2 or 3%, something to that effect. It's come down dramatically, and that is not really a problem for either the U.S. economy or then, by extension, over time, the global economy. And the third thing was, I forget even what it
De-dollarization.
was. Well, the dollarization, and that's just, I think, the hope of many, but the reality for no one. The dollar's not going anywhere, and that's pretty objectively established, not for the remainder of my lifetime, which I hope is 30 years.
Excellent. Glenn, may you live to 100. So you've heard the American point of view, the establishment point of view, as Peter Isaacson would say.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.